extraordinarily complex.
Alright, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Conscientious Emergence. Snowy day. I was going to go into town for some groceries, but it's kind of nasty outside, kind of windy, snowy, so you might be able to see through the windows there. But anyway, I went ahead and lined in a seed erupting from the Earth, a little sproutlet. And, well, it's going to be a giant sprout, actually, but it's going to have the character of a small seed breaking the soil in the middle ground there on this large painting. So I'm going to do the green in that, just the first layer of blocking in the color, and then I've got some teal mixed up to start the next gradient of the shadows in the, or the highlight in moving into the shadows of the foreground figure. But for the moment, let's just throw in some green on the seed line work.
To go do what they say they want to do, that they say is necessary, right? And this is hard because if you think about it at the moment, it obviously seems necessary, right? These are things that no one wants to question, no one wants to get in the way of. This was an unprecedented tragedy. And yet, at the same time, the Patriot Act that was crammed through in the wake of 9/11 had already been written. This thing was already sitting on the shelf for years and years and years, and they had never been able to pass it. They'd never been able to pass it. And the question is, why, when it wasn't so necessary before, had it suddenly become necessary now, right? And now, let's presume, right, they were telling the truth. All of these agencies were right. The lack of laws were the reason why that happened, right? And now they had changed the laws, so we'll no longer have any more terrorist attacks. Well, we've continued to have terrorist attacks since then. But the most interesting thing is, in the wake of 2013, right, when I came forward and journalists revealed what had happened with the mass surveillance, not just of terrorists abroad, but of ordinary Americans within the United States who were not suspected of any criminal wrongdoing. Right? They just collected the communications of everyone because why not? They could. It was cheap. It was free. And the thing is, when the Obama White House was forced to investigate these claims, right, President Barack Obama appointed 2 different independent commissions. The President's Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technologies, and the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board also did their own investigation. And again, these are packed with Washington insiders, right? These are sort of a who's who of my greatest critics, including former Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Michael Morrell. And the CIA guys looking at all these reports, going into the FBI, the NSA, looking at all the classified documents about the effectiveness of these programs, said that despite operating for more than 10 years, despite all the terrorist attacks that had happened, despite the fact that the threat is ongoing, it's real, is that it never stopped a single terrorist attack in the United States, right? Like, that is the bottom line. And this happened when it was secret. This happened when nobody knew about it. If it wasn't saving lives, then how was it so necessary? And this is only one tiny fraction of a gigantic omnibus bill. And why do I get into this when you say, how did it change the national character? What this means is that delicate balance that we talked about initially here, where these sort of governmental powers exist not only in perfect tension with each other, but a delicate tension that can be thrown out of balance with any given election, actually fell out of balance with the public, with the people of the United States. We had suddenly become radically disempowered in this. Traditionally in this country, right, we have an idea, we have an argot, a language where we describe ideas such as private citizens and public officials. But suddenly this became inverted. And now we had public citizens where the government knew everything about us, and we knew nothing about what the government was doing. And this has continued, right? And what this actually reflects is an aggregation and accretion of power amongst a very few officials, right? And meanwhile, we have the gigantic mass of ordinary American people who have less influence. They have less access to resources, whether we're talking material wealth, that are talking political influence than they have in decades. You know, when we talk about rising inequality, we are typically talking about the commercial sector, right? We're talking about that CEOs are basically robbing the United States blind. At the same time, where the ordinary people, you know, whether we're talking about teachers, firefighters, policemen, you know, nurses, have less and less with each passing year. It's all too easy to lose that big picture dynamic that doesn't happen in a day. It happens over decades, where we are losing our equality of influence over the direction and future of our country. This is a difficult thing to say on this day, but there is really very little controversy inside the intelligence community that September 11th was a preventable attack. And people who are in politics, right, they want to say the reason that this occurred was because we didn't have the right laws. Well, we know that. We have the history, we have the evidence that this was not the case, and we had the suspicion that this was not the case. But the reality of why this attack happened was something fundamentally different and unfortunately much more painful, which was we had all of the intelligence we needed to stop this attack. Government officials who are my close say this. 9/11 says this. But the problem here that is not said, that is left unstated in these things, government officials like to talk about silos. They like to talk about
Alright, so that gets the sprout happening. Started anyway.
These agencies from sharing
I'm going to pan back,
That's not actually true. Right?
zoom out, and
I worked at NSA. If I wanted information, I just had to write.
start working on her shadows.
And this is the way it's always been. You could pick up the phone and make a call. This is not just something that happened post September 11th. The reality is, bureaucratic turf wars, the unsexy political problems that no one ever wants to think about, can cost lives catastrophically. And this is the case with the FBI had some information. The CIA had some information. The NSA had some information. And because none of them had all of the information, but they had part of the information, they thought it was interesting. They thought this was a plot that would be busted. They knew the names of these kind of guys. They knew who they were talking to. And they went, oh, we're going to unravel this plot. But none of them wanted to share credit with the other agencies. They didn't want to open the vest and go, hey, let's make this a team effort. Instead, they were trying to save their parts of information so that they could get credit for inevitably busting this when it happened. The problem is, when you do that too often, actually anytime you do that, you're taking a chance that when you guys aren't working together like this, something will slip through. And that's what's happened. And that's the greatest tragedy that we have not confronted. We have not reconciled. We have improved processes on the edges. We have tried to make things work a little bit better. But the fundamental problem here is when we have people who are playing politics with lives. They're trying to build domains inside their agencies, inside their offices. They're following policy prerogatives rather than furthering the public interest. It's a recipe for catastrophe.
Briefly, do you believe that the Patriot Act in its current iteration should be completely repealed? Is there any part of it you would keep in place?
Well, you know, the problem with the Patriot Act is it's so big that really no one understands it. They didn't have a chance even to read this before it was passed. So I don't want to go out on a limb and say, oh, there's nothing good in this bill, because it's massive. Even people who study it, don't know everything that's in it off the top of their head. I will say, when we look at what it has achieved for us in the last decade, there are no clear cases where the Patriot Act has saved lives. And I think that's fundamentally a problem, because we know for a fact that rather than the theoretical benefits it could be providing in counterterrorism, we have concrete harms to the way we live, to our relationship in the United States between the governing and the government. And when we live in a moment of democratic fragility, as we do now in this political moment with this White House, we need to think about what we can do as citizens to reset that balance, to defend that balance. And I mean, this is a complex sort of thing, and I don't want to control the conversation here, but the idea is active citizenship has never been more important in my lifetime than it is today.
From all of the publicly available information that you've seen, and I know you monitor these issues extremely closely, are you convinced that there was a campaign directed from the highest levels of power in Moscow to seek to influence the outcome of the U.S. elections?
Yeah, so this is...
And you're speaking to us, of course, from Moscow right now, where...
Right. If the feed gets cut short, you guys know why. You know, this is one of those things where it's frustrating because there's so much smoke. And nobody's willing to point to fire. And I come from the NSA, right? My last position, I was working counter-cyber, finding exactly the kind of hackers that are being sort of alleged in this current moment, but for China rather than for Russia. And I gotta tell you, it wasn't real hard to find these guys. So we had this report that came from the DNI and basically three agencies. I think it was the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA. And they said in their finding that they had, confidence that this was the assessment, but there were some really weird things. This has led to this sort of ongoing drama that everybody is focused on. And it's consuming the nation with kind of a passion where we can't focus on anything else. Because we're elevating Russia to a position where they can sort of control our political outcomes. And I think that's actually giving Russia too much credit. I don't think Russia is that strong, right? But when we look at this report, and we think about, obviously Russia would have interest in this, right? Any country would have interest in changing electoral outcomes in other countries. I mean, we do it, why wouldn't the Russians? But the main thing here is the FBI and the CIA both said we have high confidence in this assessment that basically the Russians do. And the NSA, who is best positioned to actually make this judgment, said they had medium confidence in this assessment. Now, this is one of those things where, they didn't say we have no confidence. They didn't say we disagree. They said, yeah, we're still nodding our heads. We think about this. But why the discrepancy there? And the only reason that I can think about, and again, I don't know this, and this is the problem when we speak about these things, we need evidence. You can track sort of these, let's call them hacking attempts, from where they're launched, even if the hackers are trying to hide their footsteps, when you have the powers of the internet. Because this is sort of how master payments works, right? When you're watching everything.
You're going out there, Ed. Oh.
Sorry.
The feed actually has become choppy now that you're getting into the details. It's amazing. You predicted exactly what was going to happen.
It may be, I'm not sure on this, but if we have the feed that we're talking over, it's also shared with the audience on their phones, and they're suddenly looking up things like that report to get confidence numbers. They're choking the stream we're using. So if you're in the audience, please try not to download any YouTube videos right now.
As you were, Ed.
But yeah, to simplify this, and sort of tie off the point here. When they were looking at the hacking into, for example, the DNC's servers, this is a high-value target. Whether we're talking about the United States, whether we're talking China, whether we're talking Russia, everybody is targeting these institutions if they have the resources, if they have the people. That's their job. And former director of the NSA and CIA, Michael Hayden, says this. He's actually described this as honorable espionage, which I think is a bit much. But that's his perspective, right? This is what intelligence agencies do. And the problem with this is, so the DNC didn't actually provide their service to the FBI. They contracted this third-party company that's basically paid to provide an explanation that goes, look, this matches these attack indicators, right? Fair enough. We've seen these before. They're attributed to Russians. We think Russian corporate system, right? But that's all they provide. The reality here is if the NSA didn't have the same level of confidence, it's very likely it's because there were more people on the system. Right? There could be multiple actors there. We can have the French, we can have the Chinese, we can have the Israelis, we can have the Germans, all on the same system, and this happens all of the time. It happens so frequently that in NSA, we have an actual term of art for this, where instead of hacking somebody, we just watch what the hackers who already hacked them are taking, and then we just say they're copying that. It's called fourth-party collection. And because there was so much traffic on this, they couldn't really deconflict it. But this raises the big question of, okay, well, if the Russians didn't do it, who did, right? And I think this is where it gets dicey, and this is where I start to think, all right, it's the Russians, right? Because they're, in my opinion, this is personal opinion.
Hold on a minute.
So good.
You said the word Russia again, and then it just started to go choppy.
All right.
Either that, or someone's downloading, porn here. But
right. So look, we'll tie this off because it's going on for a while. There's this allegation, right, that Vladimir Putin and Hillary Clinton basically hate each other, like they're more than enemies, right? And he wouldn't want to see this. So when you start seeing a cui bono, maybe it's possible. But here's the central problem with everything we've discussed right now. It's entirely speculation. Absolutely none of it is reliable. And previously, when the United States government has seen hacking efforts that they considered threats to national security, they released evidence. When this happened quite recently, in December of 2015, right, Sony was allegedly hacked by the North Korean government. The FBI said this, and everybody went, well, maybe it was the North Koreans, maybe it was the Israeli people. We had the same kind of conversation we're having right now, right, about show proof. And the FBI went, ooh, here's our evidence. Here's why we think it was the North Koreans, and they provided this at a press conference about a month later, and suddenly all of these doubts seemed to vanish, and the attribution became pretty firm. This is what's missing. The NSA is spying on everyone, everywhere, all of the time. That's how mass surveillance works. So why is it that we aren't getting evidence about what is arguably the most important public policy question when it comes to sort of foreign intelligence efforts in recent history?
No, part of the reason I wanted to ask you this was not just based on your knowledge of surveillance systems and how the NSA functions, and obviously there's an incredible amount of hypocrisy at play here, given that the United States has a PhD in interfering in elections around the world, and of bumping off and killing elected leaders in some cases. In fact, here today, it's not just the anniversary of 3,000 Americans being killed on 9/11, it's also the anniversary of the coup against Salvador Allende in Chile. There are 9/11s in different parts of the world also that actually have the United States on the side of aggression that are remembered in other nations. And I wanted to ask you, I hope this doesn't get us too far into the weeds, but I wanted to ask you about this so-called Steele dossier. This is the guy who's been presented as a former MI6 agent, Christopher Steele, who was hired by people who were supportive of Hillary Clinton after having worked for apparently some GOP operatives at one point. And then the contents of this so-called dossier that purported to have evidence that there were powerful Russians that claimed that there was compromising information about Donald Trump, that he had these deep connections in Moscow. This is part of where the whole P-tape mythology started to then seep into the mainstream P-tapes. Okay, I really did not mean to do that. I did it, I'm sorry, I apologize to everyone. My question for you is not to go tit for tat through the Steele dossier. Is there any part of that story that in and of itself sort of feels like an operation, that the way that this was presented and leaked to various journalists and the timing of it, without ever having to have any stamp of official authority on it, to say, oh, well, the CIA is saying this, and therefore the public can demand evidence? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it seems like it's kind of almost a backdoor way of trying to push this information out there without ever having to own it at its source?
Yeah, I mean, again, this just gets into the central problem that I have engaging on these issues, which is I'm not a politician, right? I'm an engineer. We are trained to work with facts, with reality, with truths, with numbers that we can move around, right, and manipulate and actually build something from. When we start talking about just assumptions, which we can't prove anything about, we can't be sure about, you try to build something that falls down, you try to build something that falls down, you try to build something that falls down. And until we actually start working on facts, we're not going to have something that actually lasts. And this is the biggest problem for me personally, right? It's a very interesting document, right? Salacious stuff. This is the kind of thing that the vast majority of human intelligence is actually about, right? When we talk about what NSA does, signals intelligence, or signal, and then we talk about what the CIA does, or MI6 does, right? Which is human intelligence. Human intelligence is almost entirely just a bunch of guys working at embassies, or guys who are posing as business executives. Those are your non-official cover guys.
All right, so that gets the sprout started. The next layer down in tone on the gradient of starting the shadows within the foreground figure, and the sprout shadow as well. So that's it for the moment. Thank you for watching. It's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Motion Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting conscientious emergence. Have a good afternoon, Earth.
With a very limited readership.